I suspect we're working off of, well, one, different sets of assumptions, and two, I'm certain of very different ways of expressing and focusing on the concepts we're trying to talk about. It wasn't until your example of drawing and the difficulty in doing so that it clicked, because it was like, oh, okay, I understand that, I know how that works. All right, so we're all good. So any frustration expressed previously and in the future, please understand that it is at the difficulty of the task we are attempting to complete, which is communicate about ourselves, which has always been something the human race has had a hard time with. I disagree. Please don't say that you think that, you said this, therefore your complexity, your mental model of the world is simple. No. It is what it is. It is simple compared to actuality, obviously. But I think you missed a couple of points. We have associations within our mind that are relatively discrete. Fire is hot, the sun is bright, things like that. Our associations with specific moments, specific people, circumstances, whatever. Those are less approximations than the information we get from connecting those associations. I would make the comparison between and understand I'm using discrete as a very qualified and very tentative term, because it's not discrete in the sense of a bit or an actual pixel, but these nodes, if you will, are connected by, if you're familiar with Adobe Illustrator, where you can create quite complex shapes that are really just mathematical approximations. I would suggest that as a better model for the very complex mess that is our mind. System that is our mind. In fact, it's been speculated that in many ways memory in the mind is like a hologram, in that you can take bits of it out and the hologram will bits of the actual material out, and the hologram generated will be more diffused, but the general shape of it will be the same. So unless you hit a critical point, something that is integral to the structure of the model as a whole, you will not see tremendously drastic changes in it. There are examples of traumatic brain injury that, when exceptionally localized, can produce dramatic changes. Those are too complicated to discuss here. A lot of the problem we're having discussing the things is that a lot of unreferenced pronouns are being thrown around. Like when you say, okay, I've got an example for you. Here's a spoon. Now, it is in your mind. To me, that pronoun is unreferenced, because are you talking about the matter the spoon is made of, the concept of a spoon in general, the concept of that spoon, the sensory impressions stored in, conducted through the nervous system and stored in the brain about about the spoon that's in your hand. These are all very different things, and they all mix together, except for the actual spoon. which is your point, and I understand that. But if you don't take the physical, the signified, rather than just the signifier, if you don't take the signified into account, then you're missing part of the equation. And I suppose to sum up that if it was all in our minds, then things like antidepressants wouldn't work. I understand your point. I'm just trying to nudge a little bit away from an absolute statement. Nudge you a little bit away from an absolute statement, because I don't think it's quite accurate. That's all. As for the model, you talk about us existing within like a matrix type scenario. I disagree with you entirely there. We don't exist within our mental model of the universe. We are our mental model of the universe. What we mean when we say the word I is what happens when this model attempts to turn on itself, attempts to examine itself, to shift its focus to itself. I mean, it's almost a Buddhist thing to say, but our sense of identity is in many ways an illusion, because it only comprises a small part of who we are, our self-image, if you will. That's another thing. Looking in the mirror, what you're seeing is your self-image. Well, yes and no. It's an overlay of sensory impressions, our idea of what our gender, what our hair color, what our skin tone. I mean, it's many, many, many things. So, nudge away from the absolute statement, because we don't have enough information to make that statement. And the reason I'm not mentioning the first video is we pretty much talked that out in the comment thread. And also, YouTube won't let me look at it again, so I couldn't refresh my memory on what it said. So anything you said there, setting aside. And if you want to throw it at me again, or just say, hey, you didn't, address something in there, watch it again, fine, I'll do that. As for the fourth video, I'm very, very much in agreement with most of what you say. Although I approach it from the point of view of catching, being aware of things like the fallacy of intention and confirmation bias, and always double checking and learning to get into the habit of analyzing something, of examining something from different perspectives and using different methods. So it is very simple. We do have to catch ourselves either in the act or go back and retrace our footsteps and see where we went wrong, if anywhere. And by the way, when I say you or we or this is how we are, I include myself in this. I am a human being. I am fallible in too many ways. But that's that. Just making sure you know I'm not exempting myself from any of this. And the last thing is that I would not say that our mental model of the universe is limited to our knowledge, because it is possible to take two associations or multiple associations with, whatever, nodes, bits of information, whatever, and between them come up with something that does not exist in reality, that did not exist until that association was made. For example, there are no Pegasi, but someone came up with the idea of a flying horse. There is no Cthulhu, but a very brilliant man with an aversion to seafood and the sea itself, H.P. Lovecraft, came up with that. You can argue that it's just recombining old bits, but I would argue that it's not quite so simple because the bits themselves, the bits of information themselves, are not static. They change over time. And by bits, I mean pieces of information. So, fiction would be very, very dull if it were not possible to generate things outside of our experience. That's how speculation happens. That's how you form a hypothesis to test. But on most points we agree. I suspect we have a great deal of semantic difficulty. And that's not surprising to me because I have a hard time communicating with just about everyone. Beyond that, thank you for your time and attention.